WandaVision Episode 3, Now in Color. Much like this episode, you might notice, if you happen to watch my reviews, this is super different, super weird. Audio is probably not the greatest either. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was like, I barely want to review this, because honestly, this show is not doing much for me. And I was just so tired, I was like, I just don't want to move my camera and, like, switch and move things around. So this is a, slightly different setup. Episode 3, I will say, it did two things that I noticed. It was really interesting. The first part is, it's my least favorite as far as, like, the actual, like, parody element. Like, 2 is still my favorite for sure, because Drunk Vision I just thought was great. Like, the way they had to kind of mess around, and Wanda actually had to, like, come up with ideas. Like, how do I make this actual, basically, technically, he's technology, she's magic. Although I guess the stone is I don't know, however you want to look at it. But how do I make this magic look like fake magic? I like that concept. The jokes were good. First episode, same thing, not as entertaining to me, but I was like, wow, this is a great recreation. This episode, I didn't feel like was as good of a recreation, and maybe it was just because once it was in color and they were able to do, because later sitcoms did do this where they would be like, oh, here's a close-up of a character, which technically, even though like the Andy Griffith Show did that too, but once they started doing that, I was like, it's hard for me to see this as classic because it's in color and it's still in HD. Like, once it was black and white, I was like, it's super easy to kind of take myself out of it, even when they do, like, the close-up shots. But once it was in color, even when they were on the sets, I was just like, it's hard for me not to be like, this is just a color HD, except they have the black bars on the side. I was just like, it's hard not to see it. And plus, they did way more close-ups of, like, each individual character, so they kind of made it seem, like, way too modern to me, because I was like, I feel like they did too many of those. So I think as a parody, it didn't work, which I don't care about. Like, that's kind of why I was like, meh, on the first 2 episodes anyway. I was like, great recreations, but this is kind of like a super cool high-budget YouTube series that I don't care about. But the other half of this episode, of course, was the show is finally, by the end, getting into the main story, which is why I said, which also explains why they did this, because for any of you who didn't know this, everyone who got, like, the early press releases of the show, they got episodes 1, 2, and 3, which made perfect sense. And I even said that in my last review. I was like, these first 2 episodes don't really do much. So hopefully, episode 3 is kind of where things start to pick up. And that's exactly what happens. And I feel like if this was one solid event, I think that actually would have been perfect. Like, it makes perfect sense to go 1, 2, and 3, because 1 and 2 by themselves aren't good enough. They genuinely aren't. Like, 2 definitely kicks things up. Like, they have the guy, the little beekeeper comes on at the very end of the episode. But it's still like most of the stuff that's happening is pretty much like, there's the one moment on the radio, and then there's the very end of the episode with the beekeeper. And this episode, they had a bunch of little things. It was like, oh, the neighbor, Herb, he's cutting through the bricks now. That's really weird. And then, of course, at the end of the episode, Vision goes over, and it's like, he's talking to Agnes and Herb, and they're both like, they're kind of chatting up, and he's like, something's weird. So they had a lot more of those moments, and I was very excited by it. Like, even Vision had it, and I love the way they did the rewind in this episode, because in the last one, it was obvious. It was like, Wanda sees this beekeeper, whoever he may be, and she's like, no. And then they show it rewind. And then this one, Vision is like, he's starting to snap out of it. It's like, something's wrong. And it's just like, bloop. And it just clips. And I was like, oh, it just rewound. And I thought that was a really cool way to do that, where they don't show it rewind. It was just like, what just happened? They're like, the Disney Plus, there's something just F up. Like, what's wrong with my internet? It's like, no, it just rewound. And I thought, oh, that's a cool way to do it. It was almost darker. For some odd reason, it was kind of darker, not seeing it actually rewinding. It's just like, boom, like, it's just getting faster and faster, where it's like, oh, that's wrong. I gotta get it out of here. Which, of course, builds to a bit of a head, I guess you could say, at the end of this episode. We have, the babies are born, we have 2 boys. And so, it's like, oh, I used to have her brother's name was Pietro. And then, I wish I could remember it. All I can think of is her mom, is Monica Rambeau from Captain Marvel. This is her daughter. And so she's like, oh, like, he was killed by Hydra. And he was killed by Ultron. I don't know why I said Hydra, but he was killed by Ultron. And she's like, what did you just say? And so, of course, she's wearing the sword necklace and everything. And so they have, like, this weird moment where it's like, she had broke out of it for a second, and then it's like, oh, I said you're really cool. And she went back to sit down, and then Wanda's like, no, that's not what you said. And that's when it gets really interesting, because it's not just that Wanda is in control of things, is that she's also not in complete control, because it's like, someone said, hey, like, you remembered your brother, and it's like, oh yeah, your brother who was killed by Ultron. So then Wanda kind of snaps out of it, which it seemed like, obviously with the rewind in the last episode, it seemed like she was in control of that. So it's almost like she wants to be happy, and a lot of people mention Agnes that she might be a different character. So she might be trying to help her kind of stay in this weird world, because obviously Wanda isn't in 100% control, because even she's kind of flipping out, but she does have a little bit of control where she's like, well, I don't want this. Like some parts of her are like, oh, I don't want this, so I'm gonna rewind it, and then other parts she's just kind of waking up like everyone else. So I love that. And then, of course, when Vision goes in, it's like, oh, what happened to her friend? It's like, oh, well, she left suddenly or whatever. And then we see her, like, flying out of the, basically the TV bubble, if you will. And then a bunch of people surround her. So then it's like, okay, I would assume that all the people are Sword. I think they even showed that at the end of the very first episode. I think on somewhere it was like, you saw the symbol. I think that person was from Sword. So she must have been sitting in there to try to figure out what was going on. And then it was like, once you're in the bubble, instant kind of mind control. But I'm excited. Finally, it was like pure excitement, because now that she's literally like blasted someone outside of the bubble, I'm like, I feel like they have to really go all in, on this next episode, where we at least get something. So that's what I'm really hoping for. I feel like there's not too much else to say. I mean, obviously she had the kids, and it was just like, that was cool. I thought they actually had some funny jokes. I thought they did a good job with like Vision and stuff like that. I thought he was pretty funny in this episode. Them having the stork, I thought was decent. The segment itself was, also, I think that was another thing about it. The whole episode really was like inside of inside the house, and that kind of just made it feel, it kind of felt like it dragged on. And maybe part of that was, like that stork scene is literally just like a silly moment where she's trying to hit the stork and kind of stop it and everything. But all the way through, it's like, either they're right outside the house or they're, inside the house, except for the segment where, of course, Vision like actually runs to go get the doctor. But they're pretty much just outside the house and then inside the house the whole time, which I thought was a cool set. But it was just like, oh, when it's kind of indoors the entire time, it definitely kind of makes it feel longer, because it doesn't feel like you're going through all these big cuts. Even if it technically cuts from, the living room to the kitchen, you still feel it. You're in there every, step of the way. So you feel every single second as it goes by, because it's not like, oh, okay, let's do this, and then it cuts and they're, at a grocery store or something. It's like, no, we're there. Pretty much the whole 20 minutes is like set in there. Like we kind of almost fall, it's not a one take, but it's kind of how it feels when you think about, like, we pretty much stick right there. Like either we go right outside with Vision and then we walk right back inside, or we're inside with Wanda. So it's like we never really leave that like specific set of time, like those actual 25 minutes. We kind of stick there the whole time. So it made it feel longer, which can be good and it can be bad. And it was just like, I think with kind of the way that they handled the episode, it was just like, okay, because it was another parody, and it was like my least favorite of the parodies, and I think that's why it started to feel like it was dragging. And then the actual like WandaVision stuff that I want to see ended up being the best, because they had like a bunch of moments where people were like, that's not right, that's weird, Vision figuring something out or something else going wrong. So half and half, kind of right down the middle for this. Least favorite of the parodies, definitely my favorite of the actual WandaVision stuff, because finally we're getting into something big. Like I would have to assume, like I said, with her throwing that woman out of this bubble and the people surrounding her, I don't know if we'll get something outside. I'm curious how long that's going to take, if we ever see anything from outside of their perspective. But I'm hoping in the next episode we got to get something. We got to get something big, because this one was just like, okay, now things are pretty nuts. And there's only 6 episodes left, and they're only like 25 minutes apiece. So I would assume the next 6 episodes kind of have to keep, they kind of have to ramp up, because there's really not that much to show off. Like it's only 30-minute episodes, not even that. So I would assume things are, kind of got to get going after this next episode. But at least by the end, I was intrigued way more than the last 2 episodes. So I'm like, all right, at least we're getting going. I was definitely right to say, like, man, they should have just thrown out this extra episode, but they wanted, they got to get that extra week, because somewhere in the math it's like, but if we do, like, we do like, I think it was 9 episodes total, I said, or 8 episodes. It's either 8 or 9. It might be 9. I don't remember, but somewhere in that math had to have been like, well, we could put out the first 3 because that's what we're doing for press people. But if we do that too, then someone's month is going to be up by the time they get to that last episode, and they'll have to pay the money to see that final episode. I feel like somewhere in the math, that's totally accurate. But either way, I'm finally excited, I can say, because now we're clearly getting into the actual content that is going to affect the MCU. Because this is supposed to go into Doctor Strange. As of now, it's, I mean, I can't say it's stuck in the 50s, because obviously they're going through the decades. But as of now, it's just a sitcom show, sitcom parody show. And now, by the end, it's like, now it's the MCU. Now we're getting somewhere. So I am happy about that. And I'm excited, to see where we go. Like I said, considering how few episodes this season actually has, it better start picking up. I would assume it has to, but it better, as far as I'm concerned. But those are my thoughts on it. I would love to know what you guys thought about this episode, so please put your comments down in the comment section below. Let me know your favorite parts about it, your least favorite parts. Of course, I would love to know your predictions on this. It's still just so crazy. It's really hard to tell where it's gonna go. Like, will Doctor Strange show up? The whole point is, like, that's the multiverse movie, so... And I think I mentioned this in my last review. This could be an alternate universe, because technically Vision did die, but he does exist here. And so I don't know if it's like some weird thing where, like, if as long as his body stays inside of the bubble, he's technically alive in this weird sense. But this could just be a totally different universe that has nothing to do with the MCU, and then by the end they're just gonna be like, all right, and they'll just bring them over and it's technically different versions. We don't know yet. Like, that's how crazy it could be right now. So I would love to know your predictions on it. Like I said, I want to know what you guys thought about this episode, and definitely the last two as well. Like, now that things are picking up, how are you guys feeling? Are you more enticed? Things like that. So please put your comments down in the comment section below. And of course, thanks for watching.